Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire, and today we're going to talk about taking overlapping classes and other exceptions. But first, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was good. I don't know if I've told you before, but my daughters, we have a subscription for a weekly comic that they get.
Oh, cool.
Called The Phoenix, and it's so delightful. It's such a source of excitement when it arrives, and they both get into the same bed and read their different parts, and it's awesome. But this week it's gone up a notch because they started making their own comics, and they're so adorable and super funny and just really, really sweet. I love it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Did they draw them and
they draw the little panels, and then it's really my daughter is getting she's really confident reading, but her writing, it's so funny because she spells things really intuitively. And when she does, you're kind of that does make a bit more sense, actually, the way you spelled it. And so, I'm into it. It's awesome.
Oh, man. That reminds me, when I was a kid, I labeled different spots in the refrigerator, but I didn't know how to spell things. And my mom was like, what does this say? And I was like, drinks. But it was J-rinks, J-A.
Oh, yes,
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's fun.
She had written something you have to climb for eternity, and it was INT, or it was eternity or something. It was just super adorable. But
I love that.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it's funny sometimes when I bet your mom, when I ask her oh, and what does that say? And she's like, it says this. What are you talking? As if it's what's wrong with you?
Yeah,
figure it out, Mom. So it's just super cute. And
oh, that's great.
Yeah, but I love it. It's kind of makes me think of, when before Netflix and all those things, and just having to wait a week for something is kind of a whole thing, because they were but what's going to happen next? And I'm like, that's a cliffhanger. You have to wait till next week. I don't know, but it's something. I don't know if I had just given them a stack of 15 of them, would it be the same excitement? Yeah. So anyway, totally. I think I love binge watching things as much as the next person, but it's kind of interesting to see it playing out. So
totally,
it's cute.
Totally.
But tell me, how was your week?
My week was good. I suddenly got attacked by allergies, which come up periodically.
Yeah.
I didn't have them until a few years ago, and then my brother and I both started getting them in the summer. But anyway, I was like, oh, it's fine. They're not that bad. But then yesterday I was like, no, I'll just actually go get something for them. So anyway, today I'm feeling much better because I actually went and got something for them. So anyway, allergies, summertime. I just need to accept that they come now.
I know, but it's very, so I lived in Eugene for 5 years, and there it was there is one day where suddenly everyone in the whole town is sneezing, and it's pollen time, and but here it feels super random. Different people are having different things, and different things are blooming at different times, or I don't know, it just feels way more it's not just a season. It's different people have it at different times and stuff. So I could understand why it made it taking you a while to figure out what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely opened the door and was like, okay, what plants out here are causing this problem? And I don't know, but I do know that right now. And the thing with that is you start taking some allergy medication of some kind, and then your symptoms go away, and then you're like, oh, did the pollen go away? Or are they working? So, that's always the question.
Well, I'm glad you got to the bottom of it.
Thank you.
Well, especially these days too, if you start suddenly coughing and spluttering, it's
I know.
What's happening? So
it's just allergies. Yeah.
So do you have a quote for us today?
I do, and it's by Jen Sincero again, because I just love Jen Sincero. So this is from her book, Badass Habits, which I can't recall if I've mentioned yet on the podcast or not. But the subtitle of Badass Habits is Cultivate the Awareness, Boundaries, and Daily Upgrades You Need to Make Them Stick. So anyway, the quote is, when it comes to building great habits and ditching lame ones, your commitment to staying focused on who you are becoming, regardless of where you are or who you are right now, is the mightiest power you've got. So I just really like that focus on who you're becoming and what you're working towards.
I was thinking of this the other day, a little bit, just something about interacting with students. But it reminded me of like when kids are really, really small, apparently like if you're saying like, don't touch the fire, like they don't hear all the words and they're just like, fire, sweet, I'll go over it. You know, like they don't necessarily pick up on, but it's so much nicer if you can rephrase things as like, oh, we'll stay over here and be safe. Like in the positive. Anyway, just what you said reminded me of that. Instead of like, I'm going to kick this terrible habit of doing this thing, it's like, I'm going to relax and not check my email every 5 seconds or, you know,
because I'm a person who is relaxed or, yeah.
Right, right.
I like that. That's
Yeah.
really nice.
Yeah, I think, sorry, again, more side stuff before we even get into it. But someone said to me once, I was trying to like break a habit and they were like, just think about how great it's going to feel when this isn't an issue anymore. And I was like, oh, that's so different to how I was just framing it as like, oh, this like chain I'm like dragging around with me and like, how am I going to ever, and just that positive sort of, it's going to feel so good. And you're like, it is. I can't wait.
Totally. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Okay. So today, what are we talking about?
Yeah. So we're talking about exceptions that students might want to have in classes they're taking. And so, Ruth, would you tell us some of the exceptions you were thinking of with this topic?
Yeah. And so this for me comes up. I'm sorry. Now I'm realizing maybe I have allergies because I'm very like weird stuff in my throat. Yeah. So this comes up for me in 2 ways. One is as an advisor and like talking to people about what classes they should take. And then also as an instructor when people are contacting me and saying this. So the 3 main things that come up for me is, one is people wanting to take too many units. And that, like, what does too many units mean kind of varies, because too many upper division classes is just crazy and not going to be successful. Whereas, you know, so anyway, all of those things. Then the second one is taking classes early. So maybe without one of the prereqs that they need. And then the other one that's come up more and more for me is people taking classes that overlap in time. And so they're going to miss some portion of your class to attend this other class or vice versa. And so that's the 3 kind of categories I was thinking about when we were preparing for this.
Yeah, totally. Those come up for me a lot as well. Particularly the overlapping classes. That does seem to come up a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so, and it's, oh yeah, okay, we'll talk, we'll get into it.
Okay, well, do you want to start with what's working for you?
Yeah, so I think it is important, you know, to take everything kind of on a case-by-case basis. And like having some flexibility is a good thing. And part of me at first was like, oh, I have to accommodate everybody. That's just the way it is. And then I kind of flipped over to, I'm never doing this. This is a disaster. And then I think the reality is it's somewhere in, it just depends. And so that's going to be more about my working on. But, you know, like I've had so many students who, you know, I had one kid who, I know I shouldn't call them kids. It's really patronizing. It's just a bad habit. But he took 2 classes overlapping and barely attended any of my classes and got 100% on the final and had covered some of this material before. And, you know, that was great. That worked out well for him. And sometimes students can take an insane amount of units depending on what the other classes are, and it works out. And just this week I had someone asking me, could they join like an upper division class? And they haven't taken the physics prereqs, but they have all this math. They're a math major. And so they've taken, you know, and I talked to some other of my colleagues about it, but like they've been exposed to the things we need them to be exposed to before they take this class. And so in that case, why not? You know, we may as well have that happen. And at the moment, we almost have a flip case where we have a prereq that we would like to have and it hasn't gotten processed yet. So it's almost like we have the opposite too, where we actually have ones that aren't sort of official, but we would like to have them enforced. So I think the thing that works is talking to the student, and I don't think I could do it in a vacuum without knowing them. Do you know what I mean? So if someone comes in, I think it helps to know them. And like that person who asked me for, could they join this class? Like she had been in one of my previous classes and I can say she absolutely can handle it, you know? And so I guess the thing to do maybe in that case, if you don't know someone, is reach out and find someone who does.
That's a good idea.
But yeah, so I think being flexible and being open to the possibility is important. And I think drawing on your experience of them or getting more information about them is something that can work. So what about you?
That's so interesting. You said you started with trying to accommodate everybody, because I started with, no, none of the exceptions are allowed. And I think generally it's good to start from that mind. Or currently, I think it's working well for me to start from the mindset of probably this exception isn't a good idea. I don't usually think it serves the students to let them take a class in a extra rough situation. You know, It feels like we're kind of setting them up for it to be harder than if you know, they were able to dedicate more time to the class, or if they had the prereq, or you know. But that said, I am seeing that there are some times where it certainly is helpful to give them the exception. Thinking back on my own exceptions that I've gotten in the past, I was homeschooled until 10th grade and switching into high school, and then we moved the next year, so I switched into another high school, and all those transitions involved a bunch of exceptions that I definitely appreciated having, and I think it all worked out. So there's that example from myself. So yeah, I think case-by-case basis I have written down as well. If it's a strong student with the time and the willingness to put in the extra work, I think it's okay to do a lot of these exceptions. I think it really needs to be clear to the student that this will require extra work. You know, it's not like we're waiving the prereq and therefore they're done. It's, well, now they're going to have to make up for that missing piece. Or if they're doing overlapping classes, well, they're going to have to, you know, put in the extra time because they haven't been able to come to the lectures. Or if there are too many units, well, that's going to be a lot of time because they're going to be in all those classes. So yeah, just making sure it's explicitly clear that if there's this exception, if we do this exception, it means more ownership and taking ownership on doing the extra work and making up for it.
I think that's the key piece. I think that's really like super important because, like you said, I think there is this feeling sometimes like if you get permission, then it magically makes it like it's actually easy and possible. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I'm just like signing this piece of paper. It doesn't mean it's not going to be a ton of work. You know, like it's
totally
right. And you know, okay, so I kind of saved my negative stuff for later, but but you know, like you said, like I had a student who wasn't attending one portion of the class and then sort of was upset because they didn't know something that I had said during that time. And it's like, well, like that's kind of your job then too.
So it wasn't,
and it wasn't like a mean
clear
thing like surprise there's an exam next class. I can't remember. It was something, I think it was actually changing a homework problem or something, and it was pre-online. So, and it's sort of like it is your job to contact someone to find out the thing. You know what I mean? So yeah, totally. And I totally understand, like when I was in undergrad, for some reason there was a moment when a bunch of people who needed to take this class didn't have the prereq, and so they decided that was fine for this semester and we'd all just not have the prereq, and I was like, oh great, I'll take this class. And it totally didn't even enter my mind that maybe it'd be helpful to read up on that prereq stuff, or you know, something that did not occur to me. So I completely don't expect it to occur to anybody, and so I think it's probably our job to make that explicit. So I don't know. I have a couple examples. Like one student who he took all the required labs for the class, but half the lectures because it overlapped with some other class, and I signed off. And when I signed off, I said, okay, I'm signing off that you can take these classes that meet at the same time with the understanding that you will get the class notes from someone for every lecture you miss and study them and ask me questions about them to be sure you understand the content. And that worked out. You know, I think he did I'm sure, well, I'm not sure. It's possible he would have understood it to a deeper level if he'd come to all the lectures, but he passed the class. There was no real sign that he had missed half the content or anything, so I think he did do the extra work and make it happen. So I feel like that worked out fine. And I did just make an exception for one student in the fall. We're doing the labs fully face-to-face, and we had a virtual section for the labs to have a virtual option for people, but not enough people signed up for it, and that section got canceled, so we just have 2 face-to-face sections now. And then I have this one student who really would love to do the class virtually and can't really rearrange his schedule. And so anyway, we scheduled it, we came up with a plan, and so this is kind of, I think, where we're being explicit about what the extra work is to make up for not
doing the class the way that it's intended. So he's going to come to office hours every week and we'll discuss the lab, be sure he understands it, even though he's going to be doing it virtually in a face-to-face lab. So point is, we have a plan laid out in advance to help compensate for the missed work. So I don't know if that's going to work yet because we haven't done it yet, but I'm feeling comfortable with it at this point.
This is really inspiring me. I think the explicitness of it. And I think something that's coming into my head when you're saying this is it's also extra work for us. And sometimes I don't think I acknowledge that. So I'm like, okay, great. Like, I'll sign this piece of paper and they end. But then I need to, like, maybe the extra work is writing up some kind of agreement in an email. Like, oh, by the way, because you're doing this, this is what you're saying. And, because sometimes face to face, when they just want you to sign something, they're like, yep. But if you actually like wrote down, you're saying that you will definitely get the lecture notes and all of those things in some, not like a formal agreement, but you know what I mean? Like an email.
Well, then they can also refer back to it and say, what is it that I remember that Ruth said some things that I should do, and I don't remember all the details, but it's in this email. You can go back and look at it. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I like that. I like making it explicit. That's something.
And then it's also making sure, because sometimes I don't even know what I feel like would be the appropriate thing to do if I was missing half the lectures. So if I sit and think about it and decide what's the appropriate thing to do, and then we can communicate about it and get on the same page, I'm into it.
Yeah.
So anyway. So what are you working on with these
I think
exceptions?
the thing that I'm working on is like, so one thing I'm really struggling with at the moment, and I don't know if it's just, I don't know what is sort of driving this, but I've had such a huge number of students taking like just a ridiculous amount of units. And I feel really frustrated about it because, it's not something I'm signing off on and it's not something I have any control over, but it's somehow, this is going to sound more jerky than I mean it to, but it's sort of sometimes like they want accommodations for the fact that they're taking 18 units. And it's like, you still have to do the same amount. I can't like squeeze this into being 3-unit workload just because, you know what I mean? And so
yeah.
That's something I'm really struggling with where, I don't know, it's supposed to be kind of becoming the norm when I think it should be the absolute exception is to do that. And it's becoming more of a norm. And then the other thing that really is something I struggle with, I think a lot of this would be helped if I was explicit about what I meant when I said you can have an exception.
Okay.
But one thing also that is a problem is when it just becomes normalized. And so like I had one guy do it and then 3 other people heard he was doing it and came to ask could they do the same thing.
And that was some exception, like?
It was something where he was taking a math class at the same time as this thermal physics class. And the really painful part of that is like he was exceptional in whatever, like a work ethic or, prior experience or whatever. He just was like able to handle it and they were not. And so having that conversation is really difficult.
Good
and
point.
Then, I mean, sometimes am I bringing my own biases into what I think people can handle, but, based on prior experience with them. And I just like, and his thing, it was extreme. It was like the lectures, he was going to miss both lectures. And so it was really substantial. And I just like fundamentally don't think we should do that. Do you know what I mean? And so it just kind of becomes normalized and then it gets out into the student population and then it becomes people are all asking for, and especially like with the unit thing, it's freaking me out how normalized it's become because then people are like, oh, well, I'm only taking like a normal amount of units. And you're like, no, that's what the whole system is designed around, you taking that number of units. It's not weird. So do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Yeah, with units, like there's a lot of students who get straight A's and are taking small numbers of units.
Right.
And I don't think that gets spread around as much. And
right.
That's often kind of the way to get more time to be able to really understand the classes really thoroughly is to take smaller units. So back to this exceptions thing. So were you comfortable with the exceptional student who you were confident could do it? You were comfortable with him? I mean,
borderline. Like in principle, I wasn't. Do you know what I mean? Because I think being part of a class means you're part of a class, and like, you need to sort of, for all of that, all of what that means. You know what I mean? Like you need to be there every day and stuff. So like attendance is something that's really important to me. But yeah, so I think I was like borderline okay with that, but I was not with the other people. But I really struggled. I ended up letting them do it, and it was not a good idea. And I think partly like I just want to have my mindset be a bit more like yours, where like that was like my breaking point where I was like, this is a train wreck. I'm never doing this again. So I think I need to be like, I will need to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that this is a good idea.
Ooh,
like I'm
I
going
like
to
that phrasing.
Yeah, that's kind of dramatic in courtroom. But like bring your evidence stack and convince me. But yeah, I guess the thing is like, and this is not clear to students at all, but like there's reasons why we don't do these things. Do you know what I mean? And so, yeah. So I think there was something I did with somebody where they were taking you without a prereq, and I was like, I don't know if this is immoral, but I was like, please do not advertise that this is happening. Like if you know, obviously it's not a secret, but don't kind of broadcast to people because it just gets so difficult once it gets out. And then it's like having the conversation where you're like, listen, Mary is just better than you. That's why she's getting to do it. Like it's so awkward and difficult. So yeah.
Do you think, it seems to me like if we're going to have exceptions, but we're not just making it the new rule, then we need some way of having these conversations. So do you think, like what's coming to mind is something about grades and something, because that's just facts, you know?
Right.
Of course, so, you know, it might not work in every circumstance, but do you think it would be do you think there's a way that we could phrase it where it would be okay to say, you know, if you've demonstrated command of the previous material, then I feel more comfortable putting you in this circumstance that's frankly a lot harder to learn the next material. And so that's why this exception can apply to so-and-so, but I do not think it's appropriate in this circumstance. I don't know. Is that
No, I think that's perfect. And then it could be something even like with this person where I can say, yes, they have not taken this class, but they have taken XYZ math classes and that covers the same material. And maybe even just having that in my head. Because like part of this feels like it could turn into an equity issue because I'm like, normally I'm like, everyone should have all the same opportunities. But in this case, it's not even a point of like it's irritating to me. It's just so damaging to the students.
Right.
And
you're setting them up for failure
unless
there's some extraordinary circumstance, really.
Right. And I think, you know, they obviously don't see it that way. And they're like, I just want to get out sooner. And that's why. And it's so depressing when people are set up to like not do well in the class.
Totally.
And so, yeah.
Because to turn it around, we're trying to set them up to do well in the class, and that's why we structure the class this whole way. And maybe that's what we should explain, is the class is set up this way specifically to enable you to do well in the class, and missing out on XYZ part will hinder that structure designed to facilitate your learning. And so I can't recommend that.
Right. Totally. And like even when you're describing it, like going and finding a person and getting the notes that you missed and transcribing, that's so much freaking work. And it's the kind of thing that you would look at like beforehand and be like, yeah, no problem. But then 3 weeks into the semester, you'd be like, oh my God, this is a lot.
And then that's not even the main part. That's the physical act. But then you actually have to learn what it means and without the context. So it's a lot of work for sure to get it after the fact.
Yeah. So tell me, what are you working on?
Well, very similar to what you're talking. I'm mostly working on convincing advisees to take fewer units. I must not be saying it right in the advising meetings because it rarely seems to get across. I try to convey that it looks like taking more units leads to getting your degree faster because you can fit them all into more semesters and you're done. But in reality, that's often not how it works because more units spreads your attention across more classes, and then you often don't learn the content as well, and then you struggle in the later classes, and if you have to retake classes, that, you know, usually the fastest way to get out is to really get a good grasp on the classes you're taking so that you can build on it with this firm foundation. So I really felt like that was a really nice description, but it often doesn't lead to students taking fewer units. So I wonder, do you have any advice?
I think, well, that's why I wonder, I'm going to be a bit dramatic, but we need a bit more of a systemic change because I say the exact same thing, but there just seems to be this cultural shift, and it's definitely kind of increased since I started here. Like there's just, and I think some of this is, there's so many competing conversations at a university. You know, some people are very concerned about graduation rates and how long it takes people to get through. And obviously that is a concern, and it's a financial concern for students. But then there's like, yes, but we want you to know all the material and not, you know, like one girl was telling me she ended up in the emergency room with like chest pains the semester that she took 18 units or whatever. And, you know, like it's just not, I just, and it's like very fundamentally not the work ethic I believe in. Do you know what I mean? Just this like pushing through and like Herculean task, but like not really getting anything, but sort of surviving. And I just don't like it. So I just wonder, to me, it feels like we should absolutely keep having those individual conversations. And I think it's worthwhile to point out, like, yes, maybe you were able to do this in your first year, but once you're kind of moving into, like, you know, the class that you teach is such a huge time commitment with labs and everything. And, you know, it's not the same as whatever, you know, that other, like the other intro class we taught was a very low time commitment, even though whatever unit wise. So, but I think it needs to be almost a college level discussion about what's the balance between pushing people to get through. And like the thing that frustrates me about that conversation about getting people through, I have never met a student, maybe one, but like it's very rare. We don't have lifers here. Do you know what I mean? Who are just like, I'm just really enjoying the vibe and I think I'm just going to take it easy. Like no one is taking 5 or 6 years from a laziness perspective. You know what I mean? Like it's quite necessary to do that. And especially with the proportion of students we have who work a lot, like I think it's even more important. So yeah, I think it's weird to me. Like I had a student last semester and she was feeling very pressured to take a high number of units. And she almost was like, I feel bad. Like, I think I'm just going to take the normal amount. And it was just really frustrating to me that she thought that was the exception when it should be the other way around.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, if we're only concerned about speed to graduation, probably the normal amount is a faster way to graduation.
Oh, totally.
If they're struggling. So,
right.
yeah,
Absolutely.
so interesting.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, we'll carry on pushing that information.
Right. Well, I think maybe it's something that we need to find out because, like, we have pretty similar feelings about it. I wonder how many other faculty do, and maybe that's part of it, is just to kind of have that conversation and for people to be.
That's a good idea. Yeah. I like it.
Yeah, we'll tell them to listen to this episode. Like, please tick the box. Do you agree or not agree? But yeah. Okay, thanks, Claire. That was super interesting.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.